How are you?
I'm doing well, despite all the testing and felt like I had it, and then I couldn't find the email.
I know.
Oh,
Well, it is early Monday morning.
it is early.
But I do like that I can sit here in jeans in my house.
Yeah, exactly.
You are now live on YouTube.
Thank you, Colleen. Has anyone heard from Scott?
Yep, there he is. Oh, but he says Vice Chair Mo.
Why would that be? Good morning, Scott.
There he is.
Member Brown, I'm gonna have Pat Luchetti send you your own link, okay?
Okay,
So it comes up as your name.
okay, that's great. So I look for it in an email.
Yep, here in about, it'll come in my name, I believe.
Okay, good.
Okay,
Hi, Angie.
Hi, Scott. It's good to see you.
Nice to
See
see
you in a
you.
minute.
Okay, good.
just so everybody knows, we are live via YouTube right now, so.
I think whoever is the meeting host can change that down at the bottom under participants, can change his name. There's a place that you click on that'll say rename and.
There he is.
All right.
Hi, Mary. Hi, Betty.
Hello, Member Brown.
You got to be vice chair just for a minute, Scott.
Ain't no mo.
Ain't no more. Okay, so we'll probably get started here in about 2 or 3 minutes, I think. Or maybe 4. But we'll wait till Beth gets back on. And then we'll probably get started. I did receive a couple of requests for how to dial in on the meeting. So I think there's probably a few public members that will be calling in.
Will they be able to Zoom it or just call in?
Yeah, I'll describe that when we open the meeting, but yes, they can only call in.
I see.
we're going to be the only Zoom, just the board and staff will be visible.
I see. Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning, Martha. How are you?
Good. How are all of you?
Good.
Groggy.
Well, you know, we had picked up a Smith River cancellation and we're supposed to be launched on Saturday. And I'm hoping that discretion was a better part of valor, and we decided that it might be a little too chilly. So
Oh,
Oh, wow.
Probably the right call. I spent 3 very, very rough days on the Smith last May, and it was a sufferfest.
yeah.
Good character building for the kids, though, for sure.
Well, that's the debate is whether it would scare the kids off forever, when the purpose is to do the opposite, right?
I don't think so. We've been down the Smith where one time, and it was in June, it snowed so deep that we didn't put our paddles, we didn't put them in a boat. And we had a hard time searching through the snow trying to find the paddle
Really?
with our little girls, Lauren and Cody in those days. And
How many times have you been down the Smith, Scott?
gosh, I counted a little while ago, but I think 35 times.
Wow.
I still haven't made it. It's still on my bucket list.
We need to do a Montana State Parks board meeting on the Smith River.
Mhm.
Close back.
Yeah.
Members, we are live on the website, just so you know.
No swearing.
No swearing.
No personal stories, no swearing. I think
Mm.
everybody's connected. So whenever you'd like to start.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining on an early Monday morning. It's kind of, as we've said before, this is above and beyond the call of duty, so thanks for showing up. I think before we get into the meeting, I want to describe the meeting format so that everybody understands. Only the board will be on the Zoom feed. There's going to be 2 opportunities for public comment on the action item, and then for issues not on the agenda at the end. So once the board discusses the action item and has all of our questions answered by the department, then if someone would like to make a public comment, they need to please dial *9 on their phone, because the public can only connect via telephone. And you must keep your phone muted until you've been notified that your phone is unmuted and it's your time to speak. And you have to unmute your phone to speak. We have had some problems with that. If you have any difficulty finding the call-in information, it is on the State Parks website. So if you can look there. And before you make public comment, please state your name, the city you're from, and any organization you may be representing. So again, there will be 2 opportunities for you to call in after the action item and at the end of the meeting for issues not on the agenda. The other thing I thought we would do is when we do the board member reports, I thought I'd just give you the list of orders so we don't talk over each other. I thought Vice Chair Mo, you could go first, then Member Brown, Erica, you could be third, and then Betty Stone will be right before I go. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, with that, I think we'll get started. Because of the format, there is no Pledge of Allegiance either. Our new meeting format has changed things a little bit. So with that, Colleen, do I need to formally call it to order, or
Yes, well, I put 8:59 that you did.
Okay,
Is
thank
that
you.
okay? Work for you?
That works for me. Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll start with the board member reports, and Vice Chair Mo can go first.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Good to see you all again. You may recall that the last time we met, we came home and were sequestered from then until now. So my board report is going to be pretty brief. A couple of weeks ago, I just had to get out and went to Giant Springs State Park. And if it is typical of other state parks, it was very heavily used. People enjoyed being outdoors and were observing social distancing, but really enjoying a warm day in the parks. It's about all I have to report.
Thank you, Mary. Scott?
Yes, so actually not to a state park, been laying low and but getting out a lot. And as everyone in Billings, and I from hearing about state parks, the traffic at state parks, it sounds like everyone is getting out a lot. It's just great to see our trail system in Billings, which is managed by Billings TrailNet. They have a counter on one of our trails, and our traffic is over double the same time last year. So it's just great to see people getting out and being outside, walking, being active, taking their families out.
Thank you. Erica?
Yeah, similar news to report here. Unfortunately, I have not been able to see a state park in the last, since quarantine. I've been staying close to home. But yes, excited to report that is seeing a lot of folks in our community enjoying our trailheads, our fishing access sites, public land, and being respectful of social distancing. You know, I have seen some crowding at trailheads, and that, you know, it's interesting, but also happy to see everybody getting out. And yeah, that's about it.
Thank you. Betty?
Yes, I haven't had an opportunity to go to a state park since I've been back from Arizona. So just kind of staying close to home, enjoying my yard as much as I can with the weather.
Thank you. Well, I actually have been to a couple of state parks. Like I said, I was in the Bitterroot yesterday. I drove up and looked at Fort Owen. We do have a lot of activity that's happening in the ranch there, but I think there's some, it's still some projects moving forward there. So I'm excited to see what happens there. I also drove through Medicine Rock State Park. Don't tell anyone, I wasn't home for a few days, just because it is one of my favorite parks. And I guess I want to do a shout out to state parks staff and fishing access site staff. I think they're doing an excellent job of putting signs on those facilities and in the parks, clarifying what activities we are doing and what the public needs to be aware of when they're in those sites. So thanks to all the staff for doing that. I know it's just added more work for all of you guys. I also attended the Citizens Advisory Council in Kalispell the day after our board meeting in Bozeman. And I was really, it was my first time visiting with that council, and really an exciting council. They have a really diverse membership, really good discussions that happened there. And I really, really enjoyed that. Again, I think those meetings are really, really helpful. I don't know how they're going to happen in the future, but it was a really, really useful trip, in addition to the fact that I visited the Summers Beach property that we're going to discuss today. So on the way up there, I met with the family and the land trust staff, Flathead Land Trust, and toured this site. And I will vouch for the fact that those pictures that we saw there and some of the proposals really depict, it is a beautiful site. It really is. It's an exciting thing. So I'm happy that we're discussing it today. I think the only other thing that I've been doing is I have received quite a few emails in regard to how Parks is responding to the virus. And obviously Smith River floating, I've got a few calls on that as well. But as I said earlier, Park staff has done an amazing job responding to that. And I know it's been another workload for them. So I really appreciate their efforts. So with that, I think, Beth, if you're available, we'll start with our action item or your administrator report first. Thank you.
Yes, hello, good morning, everybody. Again, nice to see everyone on a Monday morning. And yeah, for my administrator report, I would like to focus on how we have been responding to the coronavirus situation because as Mary alluded to, we have not had an opportunity to really do much else other than respond to the coronavirus situation since our last board meeting. That is exactly one of the last gatherings that we were able to have actually was our board meeting in March, and then COVID-19 started to lead to some of the governor's orders and restrictions that we have since dealt with. And so COVID-19 has brought a number of changes and challenges to state parks, but we are very honored and happy that we were always deemed essential services throughout all of the governor's orders. We were able to remain open to day use throughout the entire last 2 months and just open most of our parks to overnight camping starting May 1st. We immediately developed updated standard operating procedures that followed the CDC guidelines and recommendations, as well as our existing bloodborne pathogen policy. We also developed a new operations manual on cleaning all of our facilities, both indoor and out, as well as new protocols for handling money and what personal protective equipment staff should be using. Communication has been critical, as Angie also pointed out in some of our parks and seeing some of those signs. Thank you for the shout out to staff. They have been definitely working hard over the course of the past few weeks, trying to make sure that all of those signs are posted. And as you can imagine, based on the different restrictions and closures that we have dealt with over the past almost 8 weeks now, and then to reopen again, those signs have had to be updated pretty regularly, sometimes even down to every week. And so it's taken a huge effort on staff to get to all of those parks, to all of those different facilities to make sure that those signs are posted. And also, of course, there's a whole lot of people here at the Helena level that make sure that those signs and the wording on the signs is appropriate and consistent throughout. So our number one goal throughout the whole COVID-19 has always been for the protection of staff safety, as well as protecting the general public and all of our park visitors. We very much realize the importance of keeping our sites open so people have that safe place to recreate during this pandemic. And we understand that very critical role that our parks, as well as our trail systems, fishing access sites, play in the overall well-being of that time spent outdoors. We literally saw a situation where all of a sudden, all of our indoor recreation had to turn outdoor overnight. And so that's a big part of why we've received such high visitation. So early spring is typically considered our shoulder season. And this is ahead of the mass influx of that summer recreation that typically brings in. We historically are not fully staffed this time of year, but we're starting to do that onboarding process to bring on all of those seasonal staff, as well as those camp hosts, which play a critical role and a presence in a lot of our state parks, especially in some of our more rural parks, such as Painted Rocks, where we don't have a park manager or staff on site all the time. We also have had to bring on AmeriCorps members. And of course, a lot of the camp hosts and AmeriCorps members come from out of state. And so another delay in trying to get every single state park up and running has been the 14-day quarantine requirement for some of those camp hosts and AmeriCorps members, or the occasional seasonal staff that's coming in from out of state. So some of those people are still in that quarantine status. And once they are through the 2-week quarantine, they can be up and running. So a great situation where this has impacted a state park closure still is Brush Lake out of Member Stones country. So our main peak season is about to begin this Friday. We will be opening all overnight camping, as well as our yurts and cabins at Lewis and Clark Caverns and some of the sites up on the Flathead area. And I just want to take a moment to express my sincere gratitude for the work that has already been done to prepare our park system. We know that we will definitely face challenges. It's impossible to predict every single nuance as the weeks unfold. And there's certainly no playbook for the situation that we are all in. But since we were one of the first states to open camping opportunities after implementing COVID-related restrictions and closures, we have definitely seen an influx of campers to our parks over the past couple of weeks. We, on average, were at about 3/4 capacity throughout the park system with overnight campers. For the most part, those were Montanans. We did have some areas where non-residents have been coming in, especially in some of the border areas like Tongue River and the Flathead. So you probably saw the recent article in the Helena IR, just ran this last weekend. If you have not, take a look. It's a really good article. It talks about the fact that our parks visitation has increased 60% compared to this time last year. And of course, as you can imagine, of significance is the high visitation in those more urban-based parks, such as Giant Springs, Makoshika, Lake Elmo. Giant Springs reported over 8,000 visitors in the month of April alone. So you can imagine how busy the staff have been trying to make sure that everything is clean. So we know that it will be very important to remain flexible during the summer season. And we realize that our operational guidelines will need to be modified as we learn new information and we improve our best practices, as well as modify our techniques. So just for everyone's awareness, I do want to point out some of the remaining closures that we have in place. Lost Creek is still considered closed. We are hoping to get that up and running this Friday. Part of that was just due to lack of staffing being ready to be available. Brush Lake, I already mentioned that. That will be open this Friday as well, as soon as that staff member is through that quarantine status. Bannock State Park does still remain closed until further notice as well. Camp Baker, the Smith River is open for floating opportunities. However, Camp Baker is not open for overnight camping, and that's mainly to protect staff and to decrease the congregation that can occur at such a small campground. And visitor centers and park offices do remain closed at this point in time, and more to come on that hopefully this week. We're trying to make sure to lump in our visitor centers along with our FWP regional offices for when those offices might end up opening. Since this pandemic began, we knew that the level of PPE supplies would dictate what we can keep open due to the level of cleaning that we can provide at all of our sites. At this point, we have been able to secure an additional 1,600 N95 face masks just this last week alone. I have my asset and facility program manager that is literally running the trap line on all of our PPE and cleaning supplies just about every day. And we have been able to secure a whole lot more face masks, which will allow us to keep our sites open longer. We also have a significant increase in garbage collection, as well as some rules violations, specifically fee compliance, parking, and dog off leash issues. However, many of the regions have requested additional enforcement presence in our parks to tackle those types of issues, especially some of those after hours visitation and general rules compliance issues. So we have seen a really significant increase in our enforcement staff, and a shout out to the enforcement team for stepping up to the plate during this time as well. So 52 of our 55 state parks are open for visitors to enjoy. And this wouldn't be possible without our dedicated park staff across the state that have made this pandemic response bearable while remaining positive and having that ability to pivot on a daily or weekly basis, depending on the immediate changes and uncertainty that might be coming in their direction. So for that, I just want to thank each and every one of our staff members for stepping up and always displaying such great leadership while serving the public. So I now just want to turn a little bit to our strategic plan update. Since we had that update in March, I just want to really quick make a shift there so everybody is aware of a little bit of a shift in our direction as far as our strategic planning process. As Kyanne Bishop, our Parks and Recreation planner, pointed out during the March board meeting, we have had numerous goals and recommendations and suggestions that have been provided to the Parks Division over the course of the last 2 to 4 years or so that touch on outdoor recreation and how we want to try to decide to shift our focus. So rather than simply assessing our division's current plan and just merely updating it, we felt that it would be much more important to honor the content from all of those various reports and plans, and then try to really start to lead towards more of an implementation or action plan. So what we are now trying to turn towards, along with our strategic plan advisory committee, they met on April 30th, so just a couple weeks ago. And we asked that advisory committee to collectively assess all of these items. And when I say we've been evaluated, when I talk about goals and recommendations, it's almost 50 goals and over 100 recommendations that Parks Division has been provided with some of those planning efforts, as well as the legislative performance audit. So the advisory committee has certainly acknowledged that there is already a lot of planning that has occurred and a lot there to assess. And we simply want to work, we don't want to just create another plan that we can't implement. So they are taking the hard work to literally go through and try to align all of those different goals and recommendations and plans to try to determine what we should keep, alter, or delete. From there, our goal will be to take this input to develop a multi-year action plan, which we have talked about to this board in the past. And it has definitely been noted that this is something that we need to turn towards. We want to be able to really have some established performance measurements that we can actually show we have made some success over the course of the next 2 to 4 years. So that's the turn of the course a little bit. And I just wanted to make sure and highlight that in my administrator report. So the board members are up to speed on that in case you have any involvement in the strategic planning effort over the course of the next couple months before we can meet again. And then really quickly, I do want to point out as well that we have a really extensive visitation effort occurring right now. As we have also shared in previous board meetings, we are trying to update and revise our visitation methodology. So we have been successful in securing 2 interns to provide assistance to our park staff. So in case you are out visiting our parks this summer, you might run into some of our interns that are out there trying to do some on the ground counting along with our park staff. We have Emily Towery, who just began last week. She will be based out of the west side of the state. She'll be based out of Region 2 in the Missoula office, and will be focusing her efforts mainly in Region 1 and Region 2 parks. And then we also have another graduate coming from Texas A&M, And he's coming in, I believe, this week, and he will be focusing on the eastern half of the state, which is great because, as you can imagine, trying to actually do on the ground counts in all of our parks across the state and just the sheer distance that they have to travel geographically. This will be very helpful to have 2 interns, one on the east, one on the west, to try and make sure and be out in the parks. So he'll be based out of the Lewistown area. He happens to have some family in Lewistown. He, of course, has to follow the 14-day quarantine order as well. So he'll have a little bit of a delayed start in actually physically being present in the parks. But no doubt we are keeping him very busy in the next couple weeks, getting him trained and up to speed on all good things Montana State Parks related. We also have been able to secure a lot of vehicle counters. When I say a lot, it's the addition of 100 new vehicle counters that will be placed throughout our park system. We have 131 vehicular entrances, and only 67 of them have had a counter in place. So we will have over 90% coverage, not only of vehicular entrances, but also trail system entrances, as well as boat-in entrances, such as on the Flathead Lake, where you can actually boat into one of our parks. So this is very exciting. Park staff are extremely excited about the fact that we will finally have a much better handle of more accurate visitation data in the future. So we will continue to update the Parks and Rec Board as we learn more in the next coming months. So that's my administrative report. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. That's some exciting information. Does any of the board have questions?
So I do. What is the name of the fellow in Lewistown, Beth?
Yeah, his name is Brad Kane. Brad Kane. I forgot to mention his name. Yep. He's actually, yeah, he's a graduate student at Texas A&M Bush School of Government. So he's actually trying to study policy. He's really into policy development and policy type work. So I think we're going to try and put him more on the tail end of trying to do some of the data analysis.
Huh, good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Vice Chair Moe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions. First of all, when we met in March, Beth, you had talked about, or we had discussed revenues with the new bill that passed and license plate situations. Can you update us on that? Are they looking any more promising than they were?
Yeah, they actually, thank you for that question, Vice Chair Moe. And I don't have all of those numbers handy right in front of me. And I know that our Chief of Administration, Dustin Temple, is actually trying to get a little bit better handle of some of those revenue projections from the governor's office, the budget office. And so I can certainly send out a little bit more of an accurate update on that. But from what I have heard and talking with Dustin, is that they are looking pretty good, pretty similar actually compared to recent years, more in line with that 70 to 80% rate of people purchasing it. The light motor vehicle registration fee, yes.
Thank you. And follow up, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Beth, much of what you've described in terms of the cleaning and the PPE, I think it will be important to track the COVID-19 related expenses. It is still unclear whether, let's see, how shall I phrase this? It is still unclear whether we will get any federal funding for those expenses to help us out with them. But it seems to me clear that there will be additional staff expense and supplies expense. And it would be good to know what that is.
Yeah, Chair Grove and Vice Chair Moe, thank you also for that suggestion. And I do know that our HR staff, we have a separate COVID related codes as far as time reporting, where we are keeping track of how much time that we are spending towards trying to respond to the COVID situation. And as far as some of those more operational expenditures, yeah, we're also trying to do our best to keep track of those as well. Great suggestion.
Thank you. Member Brown?
So just a quick update. I was on the governor's task force for the coronavirus. And I had talked to Angie about it. And when we first met, before we had gotten the federal government guidelines, it appeared, I mean, of course, we had the priority things, taking care of healthcare workers, hospitals, small businesses, nonprofits. But additionally, it sounded like, I mean, that amount of money, the $1.25 billion, was such a big amount of money. It sounded like there may be potential for some of that money to go to things like in Billings or trail system, but even in the state parks, maybe Makoshika for the campground or the water system at Flathead Lake or septic. But after we got the federal guidelines, it was very strict in that it could only be used to take care of directly effects of the coronavirus. And so there wasn't a chance to, better the state parks that way. But I think, Mary, what you said, and Beth, if we can keep track of any direct expenses that come from the coronavirus, I think we have a good chance of maybe recouping those through the CARES Act.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you for serving on that task force. I know you've put a lot of time in it in the last few weeks, and we appreciate you, and we appreciate you plugging state parks, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is any other questions? Erica?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment in terms of the COVID response. I've seen so much wonderful content going out on social media. A highlight on the geology, the historic aspects of different parks, the pollinators. There's a lot of really great content going out there. And even though we can't visit a lot of our state parks right now, I really appreciate that outreach and that adaptability to, find new ways to connect with people and share the abundance of educational opportunities and insights from our parks. So appreciate that.
Thank you, Erica. And Beth, certainly let Pat Doyle know we appreciate all the efforts he's done in getting the message out there. I think he's done a great job. Thank you, Pat. There you are.
Hey, no worries. Thanks for the kind words, Chair Grove and Member Lighthizer.
Yes, you've done a nice job. Thank you. Any other questions? I have a couple, Beth, of course. I just was wondering if you actually received the performance audit follow-up memo yet. I had heard from the auditor last week that they were thinking about getting a memo to us late last week. Did you receive any notification on the status of that?
Yeah, Chair Grove, thanks for that question. I have not received that memo via email or otherwise, and am also anticipating seeing that. And I do believe that the meeting itself will be a Zoom meeting. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we can attend that way, but I have not seen any other additional follow-up.
If we do, and the auditor has assured me I will get a copy also. When I get a copy, I'll send it to the rest of the board so that you see the status of our implementing those audit recommendations. I did have another question, Beth, for you on the revenues. Do you have any sense for what the impacts on our other revenue sources besides the light motor vehicle registration? If we've seen, it's my understanding there's been some COVID impacts also to our revenues, those other sources, is that correct?
Yeah, Chair Grove and fellow board members, from my understanding, the accommodations tax, as you can imagine, with the travel industry being completely hampered right now, has taken a downturn. How significant, I do not know. Again, I know that Dustin, the Chief of Administration, is trying to work with the Governor's Budget Office to try and actually get some more solid revenue projections and more accurate numbers. So I don't have those yet. He's continuing to try to get those as well. But also fuel taxes, you know, a lot of our division's budget is funded through fuel taxes as well, both motorboat, you know, even the OHV, snowmobile, you know, a lot of our programs, our outdoor rec programs, the recreational trails program, a lot of those funding sources are derived from fuel taxes. And so both the accommodations taxes as well as fuel taxes, from my understanding, have taken a pretty significant downturn in the last 2 months. So it just depends on, you know, what happens in the next few months, if the travel industry and tourism can start to boom again or not.
Well, and just to kind of follow up on Member Brown's comments, I think that will be valuable information to keep Scott apprised of in case there is an opportunity for us to recoup some of those costs. Scott, did you have any other comments on that?
Well, I have a question, and I maybe should know this, but I don't. Does state parks get any revenue from the bed tax? Yeah.
Yeah, Chair Grove and Board Member Brown, yes, we do.
Because I wonder again, I mean, just thinking about it, with fuel taxes and bed taxes, I mean, those again are direct costs from the coronavirus. And I'll try to follow up on that to see, but it would sure make sense that they would be applicable. And one other thing, we're not sure if we're going to be able to spend that whole budget, that 1.25 billion. And as of now, at December 30th, any unspent amount goes back to the federal government. So we definitely want to take advantage of whatever we can, again, that it is applicable.
Yeah, and Chair Grove and Board Member Brown, if I might just add a little bit more detail to that bed tax in the apportionment that we received. So the bed tax fund actually helps maintain our state parks. So that's our most significant funding source for parks maintenance.
And Beth, I think it might be useful to let Scott know what percentage of our budget is supported by the bed tax, the accommodations tax, and then maybe after our first quarter reporting what the reduction has been. If we can get that information into Scott, I think that might be useful for him to have.
Great.
Scott, did you?
And I'll follow up then with the task force, and I'm sure you have already, Beth, looked into it, but it'll be interesting to see how the effects of the coronavirus on the state are handled.
Right. Betty, I see you've been raising your hand a couple of times. So did you have a comment?
I was just going to say, as you had just previously mentioned, that the bed tax, you know, the quarterly report for the bed tax should be out. The preliminary report would be out like the end of May, and that would give us a pretty good indication. Although, you know, speaking from a lodging facility viewpoint, January and February weren't terribly impacted by the coronavirus. So it would be the month of March that we'd be looking at basically in the first quarter. But then, you know, the amount of cancellations and that we've had as a lodging facility for, you know, May, with, you know, April and May, which is in the second quarter, have been, you know, a lot. And I know the Office of Tourism has surveyed the lodging properties about what their, you know, estimated amount of cancellations has been. So they would be a good resource to get some information from.
Great. Thank you, Betty. Yeah, so Scott, I think Beth will keep you informed.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, let's move on to our next and only agenda item, the Summers Beach acquisition proposal. Again, as I mentioned in my board member report, I visited this site earlier this year. I think you all received all the supporting letters and documentation that have been provided to us. So I'm pretty interested to hear this proposal today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. So I think Beth is originally going to give us, or is going to start the conversation by giving us a background and overview of it. It's also my understanding we have lands unit support staff out there if we need to ask them questions. With that, let's get started. Beth?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Grove and members of the board. And I just want to really quickly point out who we also have here on this Zoom call to help provide a little bit of background and information if especially some of the board members have questions after I just give the initial presentation here. So we have Jim Williams, who is our regional supervisor out of the Region 1 office. He is based out of Kalispell. Good morning, Jim. And we also have Dave Landstrom, the regional park manager, who I'm sure all of you are very familiar with Dave, but he is here at the ready to answer questions too. And then we have Bill Schenk also with us, and he is our lands unit manager. He is relatively new to his position. However, he has been in our legal unit for many years. And so I think he presented Big Arm, I believe, recently to this board. So I think you have a little bit of familiarity with Bill anyway, but he is also at the ready to respond to any questions too. And so with that, I'm just going to start and give a little bit of history and background, but know that some of those other folks are here to help respond to any questions. So the Flathead Land Trust and the Slider family have been working for the past decade toward a conservation and public access opportunity with the proposed sale of 106 acres of Slider family property. This acreage sits on the northwest shore of Flathead Lake, and it's adjacent to a Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks waterfowl production area, as well as the Summers town site. So if anybody has been by the little town of Summers, it sits close to that. This property has been used for decades by the public already for foot access to Flathead Lake and is locally referred to as the Summers Beach. The north shore of the Flathead is a shallow delta, which provides great swimming opportunity, especially during the full pool time period of the year, which again, Jim and Dave are the experts here on when full pool occurs. But from my understanding, it's usually towards the end of May. So we're just about to enter the full pool stage and all the way through July, I believe, if Dave gives me maybe a thumbs up on the right time frame there. It also provides some hiking and wildlife viewing opportunities during the low pool times. The area is a very popular day use site. The property is accessed via the North Summers Road, where a small gravel parking lot is provided. And I believe that Colleen sent out the property area and ownership map via email just prior to this board meeting. So I'm holding it up here for everybody to see what that map looks like, but it was just sent via email by Colleen just about an hour ago. So hopefully you have all of that online. So this property is accessed via the North Summers Road, where a small gravel parking lot is provided. Flathead Land Trust and the Slider family have solicited public comment, which a lot of the board members and I believe our director, Martha Williams, have been receiving over the course of the past couple months. And we have received a significant amount of positive comment. So a big part of what we want to always make sure of before we consider any type of land proposal is how does this property align with our existing policies that we have in place? And so I'd just like to talk through a little bit of the lands policy that the Parks and Recreation Board has developed and approved and revised over the course of the past few years. So in 2015, the Parks and Recreation Board adopted the first lands policy that set forth criteria and conditions before the board would consider a state park lands project. The policy applies to 4 categories of acquisitions: acquisitions of interest in new park lands, acquisitions of in-holdings and adjacent park lands, as well as easements or any transfer of lands or interest in lands. Consideration of any new acquisition is tied directly to our strategic plan, which I gave you that update just recently, that is tied directly to the strategic plan criteria of significance, relevance, and accessibility. This policy was updated in 2017 and again in 2018. The main purpose of the policy is to identify the criteria and provide direction to FWP staff and the board to review how the established conditions and criteria are considered and that all conditions are addressed for a particular property before approval of an acquisition. So that's the alignment with our lands policy and that criteria that we want to make sure and point out to. I'd now just like to touch on a little bit of some of the mitigation efforts and some of the environmental investigation that has already occurred to date. So there are some mitigation efforts that have already occurred due to the fact that there has been an environmental investigation that has already been underway with the Flathead Land Trust and the Slider family. And FWP is of course already working with DEQ as well as EPA to learn what we can about the contamination on the site, as well as the in-holding to the site. The property does contain an in-holding property that is owned by the BNSF Railway Company, and a portion of this in-holding is not available for the public to use because it is a part of a larger Superfund site. The BNSF property contains subsurface contaminants associated with a railroad tie-making facility that existed decades ago. Flathead Land Trust and the Slider family have been in contact with BNSF regarding design features that would accommodate public use while safeguarding the contamination site. The proposed acquisition area has contamination within the groundwater, which requires that no soil excavation would occur. This would mean that no vault toilets would be allowed, but Summers does have sewer and water hookups available. The north shore of Flathead Lake can also be subject to high levels of erosion, and protection of that shoreline may be required to mitigate this phenomenon. Of course, this environmental investigation is still very preliminary and will be ongoing. So what would the involvement process and end up looking like, as well as our due diligence that we need to take? Formal public involvement has not been solicited by FWP to date, but it has been solicited by Flathead Land Trust. Upon endorsement by the board, FWP would then conduct appropriate due diligence, analysis, as well as public review process. In order for us to complete our due diligence, we will have to complete many actions that would include, but are not limited to, coordinating efforts with BNSF, adjacent landowners, Flathead County, and any other interested local parties and partners, Montana Department of Transportation, DEQ, as well as the Environmental Protection Agency. Other efforts could include hazmat, title search, appraisal work, survey work, as well as, of course, all of our cultural and historical survey efforts that we always do with any type of land acquisition. And of course, extensive public scoping efforts, especially locally. We would then carry on with an environmental assessment process and develop proposal alternatives, as well as an analysis that we would then develop. So upon endorsement by the board, and then released into a draft environmental assessment for public review and comment opportunity. So based on the unique opportunity that this site offers to not only blend the world of conservation, but also public access opportunities together in one area, FWP recommends endorsement of this proposal, allowing FWP to further pursue and evaluate it and to offer opportunities for the public to review and comment. And I stand
Thank
for,
you.
yeah, and sorry, I should say I stand for any questions as well as any of the folks that I mentioned in case there are questions.
Thank you, Beth. And I think you did a nice job of explaining what our decision is today. We're basically just asking the department to explore and see what considerations we may have if we're going to move forward with the acquisition of this property. We are not making a final decision today, and I think she did a good job outlining that. One of the reasons we're meeting so early in the season for this is because of what Beth described. There is a lot of actions and answers that we need to have before we can make a decision. And then if we were to move forward with any decisions, it's useful to have those decisions prior to a legislative session in case there's any funding considerations that need to be done. So thank you, Beth. I think you did a great job of that. And with that, is there anyone here that has any additional questions? Betty, sorry, my puppy just came in. That's who's barking.
I was looking for my unmute button.
Me too.
I do have a question. I'm a little confused about the wildlife nesting area. My understanding from reading the letters, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that is a protected area from March 1st till July 15th. And yet it seems like when we're talking about the full pool, we're talking end of May to the end of July, which is, an overlap there. So I understand this will be discussed when you do, but I'm really confused as to how this is going to affect the wildlife area. Can anyone clarify that for me?
Jim, do you want to take that one, or Dave?
Sure. Thanks, Chair Grove, Director Williams, members of the board. Both Dave and I, can answer here. It's actually a federal Fish and Wildlife Service waterfowl production area, and it spans pretty much the bulk of the central piece of the North Shore of Flathead Lake. And this Sliders Summers Beach project is in part exciting because it complements what we've done over time on the North Shore already, including parks. With the North Shore WMA was a parks initiative and funded with a unique pot of money, and Osprey View, the Matson's acquisition near Big Fork. And so your question about the closure is, yes, this would be on the other side of the waterfowl production area. And it allows public use in an area where the WPA, or the waterfowl production area in the middle, would still be closed. And that would need to be signed, just like we do on the other side near Big Fork. And keep in mind, most of Flathead Lake was Canada geese nesting habitat. And in the 40s, there wasn't a lot of geese left. So the islands in the lake, which are another part of the recreational component up here, and the North Shore were very important waterfowl nesting areas. That's why the closure is in place.
Thank you, Jim. Does anybody have anything they would like to add to that? Vice Chair Mode, you raised your hand first, and Member Brown will hit you second.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether there will be other people presenting. Can you give me guidance on that, Chair Grove?
I don't think there was any other planned presentations that I was aware of. Beth, was there? I think it's just more they're available to present any information you may need.
Okay. Well, just in follow-up to Beth's presentation, Beth, could you tell me what an in-holding property is? I'm not familiar with that term. I may not even have repeated it correctly.
Yeah, Chair Grove and Vice Chair Moe. So An in-holding is just a different type of property ownership that we have within a particular property. And so when I talk about an in-holding, the one in particular to this type of property is the BNSF Railroad that has an in-holding. So they actually have ownership to the BNSF property that is within the larger footprint of the Sliders family property, if that makes a little bit better sense and clarification.
Thank you. You had also mentioned the environmental review and the Superfund element that you described as being very preliminary and ongoing. To me, that environmental factor is so important on a variety of fronts. And I'm just wondering if that ongoing evaluation can be completed in a timely fashion.
Yeah, Chair Grove and Vice Chair Mo, thank you for pointing that out for sure. And due to the fact that it is so preliminary, I don't have a set timeline by any means that I can say by this date, you know, this and this will be done. I do have Bill as well as Zach Zipfel here from our legal unit. Not sure if Bill or Zach, if you wanted to also point out any other timeline related details that might be helpful here. But of course, another huge aspect before I do let them chime in if they want, is, as far as the environmental investigation, a lot of that is dependent on working with all of those different partner agencies that I mentioned. So Department of Environmental Quality, the EPA, as well as, of course, with the Sliders family, BNSF, you know, any of those adjacent landowners as well. And we also will have to then go through the environmental analysis process too, which does involve a 30-day public comment period. And so that is typically where a big chunk of time can occur just to allow for that public comment opportunity during that environmental analysis process. Anybody else, Dave or Zach or Bill, do you have anything else that you would like to add for Vice Chair Mo's question?
I have some additional additions if Zach does not. I know Zach was on deck there. Okay, if not, then Vice Chair Mo, Chair Grove, Director Williams, the department has been involved in exploring this in some capacity for a number of years. You know, there was an effort a few years back to include it in the fishing access site program. So a significant amount of that investigatory work has been initiated already. There are a number of test wells drilled to monitor the subsurface contamination, and the plume is what is a feature that's been tracked to document its movement through that vicinity. And so they would not be starting from scratch, but we would certainly need to pick the ball up again where it was left last time, and determine what the implications are for development as a recreation site, for example. Some of that work's been done. There was some preliminary site design work done when it was being considered as a fishing access site. So there was a look at that time as to where one could put roads, for example, or parking amenities. So I'm not certain of a timeline for that, but it is worth noting that a fair amount of that work has been completed already. And I think it would probably carry all the way through the MEPA process if we get to that point where we begin an environmental assessment. Then, clearly we'd have to have that in hand prior to, to the release of that draft document.
And if I could follow up. There's no doubt, having read through all of the public comment, that there is considerable and ardent public support for the acquisition of this property as a state park. There are, however, some public comments that express significant concerns. And I think that if we take the next step to examine the advisability of doing this, that I would want to have on the record what those concerns are. The list that I made include, and it's a property that I think cries out for management. And so while it is an extremely generous offer of the Slider family, it is not without considerable burden that would be transferred over to Fish, Wildlife and Parks. So we're dealing, and as they explore the advisability of our doing this, I hope they will look at trash, dogs, traffic, noise to the nearby property owners was mentioned several times, fire, waterfowl protection, the creosote, the property values of adjoining property owners, trespassing concerns, parking, the on-water safety, both of, I think of them as children, but of swimmers and of motorcraft in particular. Those seem to be recurring themes that I hope that will be addressed if we take the next step and go forward with endorsing an exploration of the advisability of acquiring this property.
Thank you, Chair Mo. I would just like to add to that list and staffing considerations.
I could follow up even a little bit more. Beth mentioned in her overview of the acquisition policy, the criteria themselves, but I think the background is equally important to remember, and that is that we need to be looking at with foresight for future development needs. We need to identify the long-term maintenance and staffing costs. And additionally, we need to look at whether this could be appropriately managed by other entities. So I want to make sure that we stick with our policy, that we use our policy for what it was designed, and that don't repeat the errors of the past of not giving appropriate foresight to what will be a significant responsibility for the agency.
Thank you, Mary.
A wonderful resource for Montana public.
Well said. Thank you very much for that perspective. Any other questions from the board? Member Brown?
So I have two questions. One, what is BNSF's involvement, or have we talked with them? So that's my first question.
Dave, you could probably provide the best perspective on that?
I will, and Jim Williams, please jump in if I miss anything. Board Member Brown, Director Williams, members of the board, I'm not intimately familiar with BNSF's involvement to date, other than to say that they have been involved and have indicated willingness and support for the project. I know that they have made some financial contribution commitment in the event that we get to a point of development. I think it's in the neighborhood of $50,000. If that,
50,000. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think essentially there are two pieces to that answer. There's a piece of their property that they're very interested in not having the public use. And then there's a piece of their in-holding that I think they believe does have some potential for public use. And I think that again could be parking or roads. So they have been a willing partner to date, is my understanding. And I haven't personally dealt with anyone from BNSF yet, but I know that they were involved in the earlier fishing access site effort.
Thank you, Dave. Jim, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Chair Grove, Director Williams, members of the board. Yeah, just to echo Dave. So BNSF, we have worked with them extensively up here, and they've been great conservation and access partners to date, primarily grizzly bear mitigation along Highway 2 south of Glacier, but on this project as well. And as Dave mentioned, we would have to engage them, and they would be clearly a partner in this project should the board choose to endorse it. So that work would be to come, but they've been great to work with to date on FWP issues up here.
Thank you.
Good.
Member Brown?
Thank you. Good answers. How about, I was curious on the question of the high water line on lakes and how that differs from stream or rivers. And that was brought up in one of the letters.
Board Member Brown, I can take that question, I think, and but certainly members of our legal team or Bill Schenk can correct anything I get wrong. But the high water mark or the stream access rule, I think, is what I saw referenced in some of the comment letters, does not apply to lakes. But there's a common misperception that it does. And so some of the concerns we've seen are that, you know, and particularly in Flathead Lake where the depth is controlled by a dam, the seasonal shift or the seasonal drop is quite significant. And on that delta, when the lake is at low pool, that delta becomes huge and you can go for a long, long ways before you hit water again out onto that sand delta. And it gives you the latitude to move east or west. And particularly if you go west, you're likely to cross property while you're still out there.
I see. Yeah.
So there has been some, that's not unique to Flathead Lake. That debate or issue has come up elsewhere, but I have seen that referenced in some of the comments as well.
Thank you, Dave. Any other questions? Member Stone?
Yes, first of all, I wanted to thank Vice Chair Moe because I had the same list basically of the concerns of some of the letters. And I think you mentioned trash. If you did, I missed it. That was one thing that I had too, in addition to the ones that you mentioned. I do have a question on some of the letters refer to the Summers boat launch and some of them refer to the fishing access site. Is that one and the same thing?
Dave, you want to?
Board Member Stone, members of the board, Director Williams, there is a fishing access site a little further west in Summers Bay. A very small fishing access. I think it's about 1/3 of an acre. Also one of the most heavily used fishing accesses in Region 1. And, but it is frequently, there's confusion as to what people are referencing when they say the boat launch and Summers Beach and Slider property. So the Summers Bay fishing access or the Summers fishing access site is immediately adjacent to Highway 93 on the northwest corner of the lake. And the Sliders property or the Summers Beach, which is synonymous, is a little bit further to the east. So they do not connect. There's private property between the two. Does that help? Does that answer the question?
Well, it does. I'm looking at the map that we were provided with the land that we're looking at, and there's Summers. Do you have that?
I don't think that I'm not looking at that map right now, but I don't think the fishing access is included on that. If any.
Betty, could you hold up the map you have and we can see which one you're looking at?
Can't tell from that.
Yeah, that's probably not.
You would be familiar with the fishing access fronts Highway 93, so it would be mostly west, but a little bit south, right along Highway 93.
Okay, I'll have to look at a bigger map.
Yeah, and Betty, I can, when I can pull up that map and look at it, I'm happy to communicate with you.
It looked like there was a road down to the water, like almost adjacent to this Slitter's property that
There is a
had some boat
there is a
ramps in there, but
road
that
in
may
the,
be.
there's a road in the town site of Summers
Uh-huh.
does go south almost to the lake. But that is not, you'd have to go further, a little bit further west, and Highway 93 south is where the fishing exit sits. That sits right on the major US highway.
Okay, there's not a boat ramp then where that road comes down actually.
There is
into town
not.
Summers.
There is not.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Erica?
Yeah, thanks, Chair Grove and Vice Chair Mo for outlining all of those concerns. I too wanted to make sure that those were part of the record. And I think thank you, Beth, for establishing the protocol moving forward. I think that second level of public comment is going to be really critical. I saw a lot of comments about the lack of time to respond and engage in the process. And I was curious if there's maybe, in addition to the EA process, or maybe part of the environmental assessment process, would there be opportunities for either a public meeting or some kind of working group or more engagement? I feel like the partnership and engagement of the neighbors is going to be pretty critical to establishing a good working relationship. And I just wondered if there was any thought process on how to engage the neighbors and try to work together on addressing some of those concerns.
Dave, maybe you and Bill could describe what the next steps in the process will be, and provide what will be the public's opportunity in the next few steps.
Yeah, Chair Grove, members of the board, Director Williams, I think you're spot on, particularly in a project that is as high profile as this one. There would indeed need to be, it would be desirable to have some additional scoping and public involvement at the ground level. So as opposed to us coming forth with a specific proposal for what a state park might look like there, I think what we would do is find the affected parties and interested people and come forth with what we typically think of when we develop a state park, and what typical amenities we usually provide, what a state park looks like according to our strategic planning and system needs, and if there's a way to blend that with what the community looks for. But I almost certainly that's the way we would need to progress with this site to develop it as a state park. So I think you're spot on. There would be a pretty significant public involvement component on the front end of this for sure.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bill, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Good morning, Chair Grove and members of the board. I think Dave is absolutely right. It's a project that's worthy of a high level of public involvement. The only real comment I have is typically in an acquisition process that public involvement comes after some steps we take, which is doing some title work, making sure of the ownership and other encumbrances that might be on the property, and an appraisal, so we can find out if we're even in the ballpark with the owners of the property and it's something they'd want to sell. And so, it's typically later on that we get to that public involvement, but there's no magic to that. In a case like this, we may, start that public involvement earlier and whatever the circumstances call for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Any other questions or comments?
Madam Chair.
Hello? Vice Chair Mo?
I would defer to Director Williams if she'd care to speak, and then I'll come back.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Vice Chair and other board members. I just wanted to add in too, in that when there's a request for a public hearing in an environmental analysis process, then we would automatically add that in. So it sounds like it's appropriate here, as Dave Lanston and Bill Schenk said, it's all a part of how we would move forward with a project like this. But I just wanted to add into that that's something that we would automatically do where there is a request for one. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Williams. Is there any other questions or comments? Vice Chair Mo? You need to unmute.
Been back and forth so many times I don't
I know.
know. I also want to call to the attention of those who will be doing the environmental assessment that very helpful to the board in terms of what you bring forward to us is the classification policy that we've spent so much time on. It does seem to me, just from reading the public comments, that there could be some tension between the interest in its being appealing, classified as a natural park as opposed to a recreational one, and what that right balance between those two would be. I do think that I believe her name was Andrea Slider Gouge or Googe, provided some excellent things for the anyone considering the park to think of in terms of historic significance and a number of other things of the area. But key to seeing, having the foresight about those long-term impacts is knowing what the amenity level is, what that projected level is going to be, because I think that will have short-term impacts on infrastructure and long-term impacts on both staffing and maintenance.
Thank you, Vice Chair Mo. Any other questions or comments? I think Beth and Dave and Jim, I think that's the kind of information we'll probably be looking for in addition to any kind of lands unit due diligence. I think it will be useful for Parks Division also to really weigh in on this, as Beth has pointed out, on how this meets our lands policy. In particular, I would like to see the focus on site development funding and operational potential, obviously, operational and staffing costs, and then how this may fit in with our classification system if we were to move forward. Because I think, as we've all discussed today, we realize that this is in addition to this being a wonderful generalist opportunity, there is also the fact that there will be additional costs and burdens received with this site. I'm in particular concerned about the impacts on staffing. Amy Grout, our Flathead Lake Parks manager, is a rock star, and I think she's doing an amazing juggling act already. And I absolutely don't want to add to her level of workload without additional resources. So I think that is to me going to be a very critical piece of this analysis. I know we won't know until we get further down on the planning. First, we have to decide if the site's appropriate, but I do think we, as Mary pointed out, as Vice Chair Mo pointed out very well, that we need to go into this situation with our eyes wide open, basically, to what the opportunities in addition to the costs are. And I thank all of you for your thoughtful questions. I think that's all the topics we were going to discuss. Is there any further questions? If not, is there anyone interested in entertaining a motion? Vice Chair Moe?
I didn't see a suggested motion in the packet. Was I not looking in the right place?
There was one on our action sheet. Does
Oh.
anyone else have the action sheet?
The cover sheet.
The cover, yeah, the cover sheet. Maybe we could have that emailed to the board.
I'll do that right now.
Would you, shall I read the proposed motion?
Yes.
Sure.
I move the Parks and Recreation Board endorse the proposal to initiate due diligence to explore purchase of this property.
Chair Grove, I would make that motion.
And I'll second it.
Thank you. And again, I want to emphasize, this is the part of our meeting where, well, first, I guess, is there any discussion on the motion?
I just want to clarify that due diligence means all of the things we just talked about.
Great, thank you.
Is there
Any other?
anyone, is there anyone on the line that was hoping to
Well,
comment?
we're gonna do public comment. I'm just waiting to see if there's any board comment or discussion on the motion before we do public comment. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, then now we can do public comment on the motion. And I kind of want to just reiterate the directions again so everybody understands. You have to dial *9 in order to, on your phone, in order to raise your hand for the webinar. You will be notified when your phone is unmuted and it is your time to speak. Once you are unmuted, we will need you to state your name, the city you're from, and any potential organizations you are representing. And then you will provide your comments. This is to speak to this motion only. We will have additional public comment period at the end of the board meeting. And I also just wanted to acknowledge that, as we've discussed in our dialogue today, is we have received a lot of support letters and we do have a lot of documentation already. So we are aware of some of the public comments in addition to what could be made today. So with that, I think I asked Katie if we have any people on the line that are willing to make public comments today.
Yes, hi, Chair Grove. We have 2 people that are here to have their hands raised to give public comment. So I will just unmute them one at a time.
Okay, I think we're ready for our first commenter.
Okay.
Please remember to unmute your phone, and we welcome you to our meeting and are anxious to hear your comments.
Good morning. My name is Andrea Slider-Googe. I live in Kalispell and work in Summers, and I represent the Slider family. First of all, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the State Parks and Recreation Board. We appreciate your thoughtful consideration of the acquisition of our family property at the north end of Flathead Lake in Summers. The work of your board ensures that lands we all love are enjoyed by Montanans and visitors for generations to come. I feel like a lot of my prepared comments have been covered by the thoughtful review of this opportunity by the board, and so I would just like to offer a few personal comments. When I returned to live in the Flathead 3 years ago, I was stunned by the number of people accessing our property. The dismantling of a former electrical substation inadvertently created a parking area, making the site seem broadly open to the public. This available parking, coupled with social media, some news articles, and growing families who shared memories of this special location, resulted in dramatic increases in the number of people visiting Summers Beach. On spring days in recent years, the unintended parking lot does overflow onto Summers Road, and the number of people on the beach on a warm day is astonishing. I've been a little curious, and so I decided to spend time talking with people visiting the beach. They come from near and far, from Evergreen, Whitefish, Kalispell, Kyla, Big Fork, Lakeside, Polson, out-of-state visitors, and not to mention daily walkers from our Summers neighborhoods. People learned about the beach from lots of different places, family and friends, social media, but most of what I observe are family and friends enjoying access to the water and a really special camaraderie. There's joy from frisbees and kites and remote-controlled cars, picnics, sandcastles, canoes and paddleboards, dogs fetching sticks, and laughter of people young and young at heart. We recognize that it's not all perfect. We observe and hear complaints about dogs, dog feces, litter, unlawful fires, illegal access into the waterfowl production area, and some visitors are not respectful of property boundaries. But our family is grateful for the interest by Montana State Parks, and we believe that management by Montana State Parks, coupled with education, will promote positive usage of Summers Beach and respectfully manage adjacencies of the waterfowl production area and neighboring homeowners. We hope that visitors will experience admiration and respect for water, mountains, fresh air, the grandeur of Montana that we all love, and humbling gratitude to be under our big, big sky. The board has already talked about the complexities of the site related to some of the BNSF contamination, but we are very encouraged and excited that BNSF has indicated that a portion of its property may be included under a potential long-term lease, and together these properties can create a park of exceptional significance. One of the other things that we are most excited about is the public input. The process to meet the timeline to be talking with you in early May was short, and we did extend the deadline for public comment a couple of times to make sure that people both in favor and opposing had some opportunity to comment. That created some additional publicity, and as a result has potentially created increases in traffic to our site. But we are very encouraged that the public's input helps determine the amenities of what will be included and how the site is developed. It's really not about the vision of our family or a few individuals. Lastly, I just want to share that access for people is important. Public access sites are too few and far between. Over 7 miles of the North Shore is closed to public access for a significant portion of the year. Supply of public access sites is low and demand is high, but we do believe these adjacencies can be managed well. Sites like Summers Beach are unique and rare, truly a legacy opportunity that may not pass this way again. And on behalf of our family, I just sincerely hope the board moves forward with a recommendation to advance this proposal. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your time and thank you for your comments. I'm wondering if it's appropriate if we have the board ask you any questions, if they have any questions right now. Can we do that right now? Colleen? No?
Yes, you can go ahead and ask her comments. That's fine.
Or ask her questions since we have her on their phone. Does anybody have any questions for Andrea? Vice Chair Moe?
I don't have any questions, but I just want to comment, Andrea. Sorry if I massacred your last name early. I wanted to thank you and your family for the generosity of the offer without knowing what will come as we go forward. I think that should be said on behalf of the people of Montana. I also want to compliment you on the letter that you supplied as part of the public comment. It was quite comprehensive and visionary. And finally, I thought your diplomatic responses to the many, many people who did comment was really notable for the level of conversation that we wish we saw more often in Montana. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's humbling to be a steward for property of this size, and honestly, it should be in the hands of an agency so that the public can enjoy it. So we do very much appreciate the board's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, thank you, Andrea. I think we're I'm confident we'll be in touch in the future. Thank you for your time today.
Okay, we have one more person that has a hand up to comment.
I'm sorry, we have one more commenter.
Yes, we do.
Next comment, thank you.
Hi, this is Laura Katzman from Kalispell and Flathead Land Trust. Thank you, all of the board and folks from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks that have helped support this project and listen to all the many comments and input that's been provided and considering this amazing opportunity we have. So there was some questions asked earlier that I wanted to address a little bit and then offer up the chance to answer any questions of the board. We've been working a long time trying to get the various entities that are major stakeholders or folks that should be involved in this project to the table. Basically, over the last 10 years it's happened. BNSF has been at the table. We've been trying to get them to the table, or they've been at the table for that entire 10 years, and they've actually been significantly involved with trying to help make this happen for about 4 years. So it took a long time to get everyone to the table, but BNSF is a strong partner. They have agreed to include a portion of their property, I think as Andrea mentioned, that is south of Summers Road, adjacent to Summers Road in the future park, if there is a future park, hopefully. And there's a piece of property that they want to keep out of the park, but they have offered funding, they have offered the ability to put infrastructure on their property, and they've been, through different folks that have been involved in the process over the years, very supportive. So we appreciate that, and I'm sure that they will be closely involved in any process in the future. We've also worked closely with the Environmental Protection Agency and Department of Environmental Quality throughout those years, and they both entities, Roger Huger-Heidi of Environmental Protection Agency and Dick Sloan of Department of Environmental Quality, have voiced support for this site becoming a future public recreation site. They have the extensive background of all the environmental studies that have been done and the history, and are supportive of that. So that is something we strive to obtain early on, to make sure that all the work that goes into this is supported by folks that know that background. And one of the landowners that is, of course, a key neighbor is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And the Fish and Wildlife Service has also been involved and very supportive over the years, which is really key too, I think, because they will be influenced by the number of visitors and the potential effects to the waterfowl production area in the future. And if they're supportive, I think that speaks volumes. We have had a lot of input, as you've seen, from some of the neighboring landowners to the west, and I think they've had some very good input, and their input could be very useful in making sure the site is something that other folks that are adjacent to the property throughout time will be able to live with and enjoy. And I appreciate hearing the details that they've already expressed and learning more from folks that are close to the site and able to give that kind of input. So I guess that's some of the background that I wanted to tell folks about, but are there any questions from the board for Flathead Land Trust?
Any questions from the board?
This is Colleen. Would you please spell your name for me for the record?
Sure, it's Laura-Katzman.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Laura, I have one question. You know, in our information we provided is, I think it's been mentioned a few times today, there, BNSF has offered some financial support for this site. I'm just curious if you have any other partners or sense for financial support for this site if we do move forward.
Oh, good question. We have, I should have mentioned this too, we have as an organization in our letter of support made sure that we know there's a lot of operation and maintenance costs in the future, and that the Parks Department already has a full plate and a lot of costs that they need to cover. So as an organization, we have committed to help raise an endowment for operation and maintenance for the future. And we think that we have partners that are willing to contribute to that. We don't have a large set of folks that have already committed funds or anything, but we have partners that said they will help us raise those funds.
Great, thank you. And then another question I had is, you know, as has been discussed here today, obviously this site begs for some type of management. And I was just curious, you know, Dave Landstrom, our regional parks manager, also mentioned this site has been under discussion for a period of time. And I just wondered if there had been other entities or agencies that had been approached about managing this site, and what had been their position, and any feedback they could provide on who else has been offered to manage this site.
Yeah, so we approached the Fish and Wildlife Service to try to add this property to the waterfowl production area, but have it remain open year-round for public access. They considered that, and there was some local support for that, but ultimately their structure of how they're able to manage this site didn't allow for that. So they don't think they can be that kind of a partner. The county, in the past with projects like this, has said that they just do not have the capacity to have any more costs associated with any access sites. They're closing access sites in the county, and I think they think it's a great idea if somebody else would step up and be the landowner. You know, through Fish, Life, and Parks, we had initially worked with folks for this to become a fishing access site, even though it doesn't meet the exact model of a fishing access site, because it wouldn't have motorized boat use or a boat launch, and looked at some other ways, creative ways to help this to work. And it's come full circle, I guess, to coming to the Parks Department. I think the Parks Department's actually the best fit for the site, and it would be wonderful if it, you know, could be added as a state park. I think throughout time that would be the best entity to manage the site.
Great, thank you, Laura. And thank you for all your time putting together all the information and background that you provide for us for our discussion today. We appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for considering this proposal, and we appreciate all the time that you've taken so far with, and that you will be needing to take in the future with this project.
Thank you, and have a good day.
Thanks.
Katie, do we have any additional commenters?
That is it.
Great. Okay, with that, is there any further discussion from the board on the motion? Seeing none, are we ready to vote? Do you want me to reread the motion in front of us? Or maybe Colleen, you could restate it so we are clear on what we're voting on?
Yep, it is. The Parks and Recreation Board endorsed the proposal to initiate due diligence to explore purchase of this property.
Okay, that is the motion in front of you. If there's no further discussion, All those in favor?
Aye.
Jessica, can you unmute? Or I mean, Erica, not Jessica.
Aye.
And Betty,
Aye.
were you able to get all the votes, Colleen?
Yes, I was. Thanks, Chair Grove.
Thank you, and thank you all for that. Motion carries. Okay, so the last agenda item is public comment for issues not on this agenda. Is there any, Katie, is there anybody out there that wants to make just a general public comment?
Chair Grove, I see no hands up.
Thank you. All right, I think with that, I just want to again thank you guys for your thoughtful consideration today. I think this is an exciting proposal, and I'm looking forward to see where it evolves to. Is there any other comments from the staff or the director that we need to? Scott does. Scott, did you have another comment?
I just wanted to thank you, Chairman Grove, for your great leadership during the meeting today. Thank you.
My very first Zoom meeting.
You did well.
Any other comments? All right, seeing none, thank you guys, and I hope everybody has a really good day. And thank you, Director Williams, for joining us. Sorry you're not on the Smith, though.
Yeah, well, I'm looking out at the snow right now and I'm
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But I'd love to add in, Madam Chair and board members, just a hearty thank you to you, to the governor, and especially to our park staff in leadership in these extraordinary times. And I remain really heartened and impressed with how everyone has stepped up and responded the best we can. And just how we're reminded how important the outside and our parks and cultural and recreational resources are. So thanks.
Well
for
said.
everything. Yeah,
Thank you for being
Thank
with
you.
us today. It means a lot.
my pleasure.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and I think we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Bye.